The wind skins the prairie, the telegraph wire sings. A lost bride knocks the wrong door at Split Rock. A mute girl clings. We waited. Tin photograph, broken spur, the stove's red hush, a black duster finding its work. One shot, a knife's flash. Come closer, family is chosen. The wind came low and mean across the flats. A skinner's blade drawn edge first. It took its time. It worried the wire and made it sing. A bowed string stretched clear from the section line to the far divide. Snow went crossways in the last light, not falling so much as driven, fine as salt, stinging wherever skin dared show. Josie Hart leaned into it, one hand on the brim, the other tight around a cloth valise that had seen better towns. The prairie was a white sheet with no handwriting on it. Love this tale? Hit like, share, and subscribe to keep the West wild. She had followed wagon ruts until the wind erased them. She had followed a name on a paper until that, too, felt thin as breath. Mr. Carter, Split Rock Ranch. Somewhere in the blow, a horse snorted, and the telegraph wire shivered out a long note that sounded like a man thinking of home and deciding against it. A shape squared itself from the weather. A house, low, tight, eaves swept clean by the norther. The porch posts were notched where reins had been tied all winter. The door wore a drift to the sill. Hinge nails ticked in the cold, counting off seconds like a station man's key. She meant to knock. The wind did for her, shouldering the panel. The door unlatched an inch, let out a band of stove heat, and with it the small, hopeful smell of coffee gone to dark. She raised her fist anyway and set it gentle to the wood. That was when the door opened, as if the house were breathing, and the man in the frame took up the light. He was tall enough to split the draft. Slate-gray eyes, cool and steady, not unkind, just careful the way winter is careful. His shirt was plain. A black wool duster hung on a peg behind him. The stove's fire laid copper along the knuckles of his left hand where a silver ring showed itself, and went quiet again. "Evenin'," she said, voice roughened by the road. He looked past her shoulder first the way men do who have stood up to storms and didn't get their choice about it. Then he stepped a half pace to the side so the wind hit him and not her. "Wind'll skin a fool standing out there," he said. "In you come. Till sunup." She came in on stiff legs, the weight of the blow falling from her like a wet coat. Heat from the potbelly stove seemed to rise out of the planks. Hinge nails clicked again behind her as the door found its seat. The telegraph line outside threw its voice once more, a thin, high thrumming that threaded the gaps in the chinking and took a place in the room like a song nobody admitted knowing. "I'm looking for Split Rock Ranch," she said, still facing the fire because her hands wouldn't yet answer for themselves. "For a Mr. Carter." "This is Split Rock," the man said. "Name's Luke Hardin." He studied her without rudeness. The ring on his hand picked up a short flame and let it go. "No Carter here." The news did not strike all at once. It fell in pieces like powder snow shaken from a branch. She nodded as if someone had asked her a different question and looked down to where the toe of her boot had wet the floor. He reached past her, not touching, and hooked the black duster from its peg. He settled it over her shoulders with the practice a man gets from tending things that outlast him. Stock, tools, a child. The wool held the heat in a way nothing else could. The weight of it said what words did not have to. It said she might stand a while. "Bench there," he told her, chin to the wall. "Stove'll warm you faster if you don't crowd it." She went to the bench, set her valise across the sill first, careful with the latch, as if the house belonged to someone sleeping. Breath still smoked from her. She could feel the road loosening its hold, one finger at a time. "Josie Hart," she said into the part of the room where names lived or didn't. From back along the rail, there was a letter. He gave a single nod that could have meant most anything, and moved to the stove to bank the fire, his palm passing once through the light so the ring glinted and went dull. Outside, the wire sang again, a longer note this time, drawn clean as if it had found its pitch. The sound slid under the door and lay along the board seams like a thin dog seeking heat. They let the quiet do the work. The wind pressed its face to the logs and then lost interest. Somewhere a horse stamped and then stood still. In the few places where the house breathed, you could hear the line's small music keep time. He brought a cup. She did not see where it came from. The kind of house that sets things in their same place tends to hand them up when asked. She wrapped stiff fingers round it and took in the steam. "Till sunup," he said again, as if drawing a line on a map nobody could see. "Not unkind. Careful." She nodded. The duster rode her shoulders like a promise that was not yet a promise. She watched the silver ring pick up and lose the stove's light, and she listened to the wire hum in the dark, like a story that had decided to begin. Heat worked slow as a team on a grade, pushing back the road chill inch by inch. The potbelly stove ticked as the iron eased. Resin hissed in the seams of the split wood and threw a clean pine smell. By the door hung a small bell braided into a strap, its clapper a spent brass shell that winked in the fire. It gave a single hollow note when the house drew breath, then stilled. Josie felt pins and needles rise in her fingers, the pain that means life coming back. The black duster held her like a hand on her shoulders. She took a sip. Coffee had gone bitter, but it was warm, and warmth was the first and only kindness she was in any shape to take. She let her eyes learn the room without turning her. Head, plain table rubbed smooth by work, boots set heel to heel by the hearth, a rocker with a rag doll propped in its crook. The doll's name would be something simple. It was stitched from a flour sack and wore a faded calico. One button eye looked sure of itself. The other had been mended with thread, the color of creek water. Luke moved like a man used to his own space, not clumsy with it, just careful where he set silence. He banked the fire and stood where he could see both her and the door without making a picture of it. Outside, the telegraph wire found a longer tone and wrote it, a high, thin hum that laid itself along the baseboards and seemed to wait. That was when the small sound came. Bare feet on a stair, not sneaking, just measuring each plank for strength. A child paused where the light broke off. Josie could feel watching the way you feel weather turning. On the skin first, a girl stepped into the reach of the stove, hair sleep-tangled, hem of her nightgown frayed to threads a mother would have trimmed. She carried no fear in her hands, only caution in her shoulders. The rag doll in the rocker leaned as if to listen. The shell bell at the door clicked once, soft as a throat being cleared. The girl looked at Luke first, as if asking who this wind-burnt woman was and whether storms arrived dressed like that. Luke didn't speak. He didn't move. His left hand, with the silver ring, stilled on the stove rail. The girl came the last 3 steps to Josie and found a fold of the duster. Small fingers set there and held as if testing cloth for truth. The wire outside gave a thin tremolo, almost a quaver. The girl's mouth opened. A sound came shaped like a word that had been waiting a long time for a door to open. "We waited," she said. The room seemed to lean to hear it. The stove breathed. The bell did not dare ring. Luke's jaw worked once and then was a rock again. Whatever lived behind his eyes took a step forward to the light and then stood back, steadying itself against old winters. Josie's answer was mostly air. "I'm here now." It wasn't a promise, not yet. It was a kind of report, like tapping back on a line to let the other end know the operator still sat his stool. The girl's hand tightened and the black wool gave a small sigh where it creased. Luke found his voice in the same place men find rope in a storm, without looking hard. "Sadie," he said to the child, and the name knocked around the room once and settled. To Josie, he said nothing more. He didn't need to. The wire outside took up a new pitch, close to the one a mother might hum when she'd run out of words. Sadie glanced at the rocker. Josie followed her eyes. "Is that Daisy?" Josie asked, not quite whispering, not making anything of it. The girl nodded one time. She didn't pick the doll up. She kept hold of the coat and the woman in it, as if warmth could be taught to stay by demonstration. The fire popped a sap pocket. In the quiet after, Luke stepped away from the stove long enough to hook a kettle and set it where the heat would do its job. His ring clicked the iron lip. His face said he had seen a ghost and elected not to run, not this time. "Bench'll take two," he said. "Sit gentle." Josie eased to one end. The child slid beside her, shoulder to duster, duster to Josie, the smallest kind of shelter forming without ceremony. Up close, the girl smelled of flour and cold air. She watched Josie's hands the way children watch a stranger's dog, hoping, cautious. Outside, the wire thrummed to a close like a bow lifting off a string. Smoke braided toward the rafters and laid down. The little shell bell quit fooling with itself. In that rested quiet, the first thing that felt like a future took a chair at the table and did not speak, which was fitting for a house that valued silence properly. Luke said, almost to himself, "Till sunup," like a man marking the measure on a piece of rawhide. But the words had changed. They did not sound like a boundary now so much as a place to start. The house learned them, and they learned the house. It did not happen fast. Heat moved out of the iron belly in rings, each a little wider, like a pond taking a stone and thinking it over. The shell bell by the door quit its fidgeting and settled back into leather. Outside, the line sang a thin, steady note and then went to listening. Luke crossed to the north door and shouldered the plank until it seated clean. He slid a worn wedge into the jamb, then tacked a scrap of sacking along a seam where the wind liked to find purchase. He worked without racket, the way men do who've spent years paying attention to small leaks that become big trouble if you don't. When he passed the table, the silver ring on his hand ticked the edge of a tin tobacco box that lived on the shelf. The lid trembled open the width of a thumbnail. Inside, just for a breath, Josie saw a daguerreotype no larger than a biscuit, a woman's face calm as Sunday water, bound with a blue ribbon gone soft from being tied and untied. Luke shut the lid with his thumb, as if that were the only way to keep heat in the room. The ring tapped once. Quiet again. He fetched a bucket, set it near the hearth. "Water'll be ready," he said, more to mark the plan than to converse. "I'll steam hay for the studs." He took down a kettle with a broken ear someone had mended neat with wire, poured in what the day allowed and set it where the fire could make something of it. Josie loosened the duster at the neck. The wool had caught a burr in the collar seam. A tooth of wire had pricked through. She reached into her valise and brought out a small roll of needles and thread, the little kit every woman keeps when there's nobody else to do the mending. She did not ask. She set the coat across her knees and found the place by touch. The rag doll from the rocker watched with its sure button and its doubtful eye. The child, Sadie, stayed close enough to borrow heat, far enough not to be chased. Her attention marked the needle's travel like a cat watching a moth. "Just need a roof through the blow," Josie said, thread between her teeth to bite a length off. Luke didn't look up. "Ain't much, but it holds. Words in that house stayed where you put them." She folded a small pad from her own handkerchief, set it under the collar where the wire bit, and ran a line of plain stitches, not pretty, not show, but strong. Her hands had the calm you get after you've seen worse than weather. Every draw of the thread tugged a little of the road out of her. The coat's black wool took the work and gave nothing back, except the sense of a tool set right. Luke opened the north door and stepped into the lean-to like a man going out into his own shirt. The wind tried the crack and failed. From the yard came the sound of a horse shifting weight, the creak of leather, the blow of breath. Luke's boots spoke once on the porch, then the scrape of a feed bin lid, then steam rising when he poured hot water over a pan of chopped hay. The smell drifted in, warm and sweet as if summer had sent a letter. Josie's needle went and came. Sadie reached out, hesitated, then flattened a small palm on the duster's hem to steady a world that did not quite belong to her yet. The girl watched the thread disappear into cloth and appear again, the surety of it, the way the torn place learned not to be torn. "Daisy's seams are comin' loose," Josie said, not lifting her eyes from the coat. She said it to the room, to the child, to the quiet, whichever chose to answer. The child's chin dipped once. The blue ribbon from the tin box came back to Josie's mind, like a tune you don't know you know, not yet. She finished the last stitch, turned the collar to test it, and laid the needle flat on the bench so it would not go wandering into a foot. Luke came back trailing winter. He set the bucket near the stove, lifted the kettle with a cloth, poured a slow gallon over the hay he'd brought in a gunny. Steam rose like a ghost that had decided to be kind. He kept his hand in the mist so the heat took the ache out of knuckles a decade old. The rink dulled where vapor kissed it. "Studs'll eat better warm," he said. "Keeps a belly honest in weather like this." Josie nodded. That was a language she understood. How you look after things that need looking after, and it looks after you back. She shook the coat once, offered it, left shoulder first. The wool remembered her shape already. He didn't take it. He stood as if he'd meant to and thought better. "You keep it," he said slow. "North wind's got long teeth." The stove ticked content. The shell bell by the door hung quiet, leather strap relaxing as if it, too, had decided they might live through to morning. Somewhere under the sound of heat and boards and breath, the wire outside set a small, satisfied hum along the sill. The house drew air in a full lung now. No catching, no flutter. On the table, the tin box sat square, lid shut true. Josie did not look at it again. She had already learned what she needed. Some loves are kept where the hand can find them in the dark. She tucked the needle roll away and set her palm flat on the duster's shoulder, as if to say to the cloth, and to the girl, and to the room itself, "This will hold." Luke set a second cup down near her elbow, not touching, not asking. The steam made a thin ghost between them, and then was gone. He took the chair that faced both door and stove, without making note of it. Sadie slid closer by a thumb's width, the way a creek inches toward a bank it has chosen. Outside, the line gave one last bright pluck and then rested, and the house, at last, breathed even. Love this tale? Hit like, share, and subscribe to keep the West wild. Morning didn't come so much as thin itself into the room, a gray seam along the east chink. The stove breathed easy. The shell bell lay quiet on its strap like a spent cartridge that had done its work and would brag to no one. Outside, the wire held its tongue, listening the way old men do on courthouse benches. Josie set the black duster aside for a spell and reached for the rocker. Daisy had lost a shoulder. A handful of stuffing showed like snow pushed out under a fence board. Josie turned the doll in her hands, gentle, businesslike. Needles and thread came out of her roll, neat as cartridges in a belt. She threaded brown cotton and set to work. Sadie slid closer, not asking, not blinking. The first 2 stitches took. The third balked where the old calico had thinned to paper. Josie stopped. She could bully it, but that's no way to teach a torn thing how to hold. She lifted her eyes, hunting the room for something that would take a knot cleaner than the plain stuff she had. The tin tobacco box on the shelf remembered her before she remembered it. It sat square as a rule book. Luke had tapped it shut the night before like a man closing weather inside. Now he reached up without looking and set it on the table. The silver ring on his finger clicked the lid. He opened the tin. A small daguerreotype looked back, Ruth Ann's face steady and Sunday calm, tied with a blue ribbon that had gone soft at the edges from years of tying and untying. Luke set his thumb on the knot, then eased it loose. He looked at Josie, then at Daisy, then at the ribbon as if measuring what a thing means when it stops being memory and starts being help. Silk holds, he said, and no more. Josie didn't reach for it until he set the ribbon closer. She took only the edge, teased out a single blue strand the way women do with party ribbon, drawing a fine filament that would lie down in cloth and not cut it. She folded the rest back across Ruth Ann's picture and nodded once, a promise that needed no words. She rethreaded the needle with that blue and began. The stitch took and held. Another followed. The seam learned the lesson. Sadie breathed out through her nose. A tiny laugh stifled quick, as if laughter might spook and run if you looked at it. From the doorway, Luke said, rough as gravel but soft as he knew how, "The girl laughed." He stood there with his shoulder to the jamb, coat unbuttoned, watching a small piece of the world act right. You could see the wind lift off him. Sadie left off staring and went to the little cupboard by the stove, a place she could reach without climbing. There was a skillet biscuit black at the edges, yesterday's or maybe worse. She brought it solemn as a collection plate and set it into Josie's hands like a thing that might decide the day. Josie smiled with the eyes first. "Well now," she said, as if a hotel in Cheyenne had sent over their best. She broke the biscuit and ate it like a queen eats a peach. Slow and careful, pretending not to notice the burnt. The girl watched every bite and straightened her small back once. Proud has a way of living in the bones. When the last crumb was tucked away, Sadie fetched a charcoal nub from the stove wood and went to the corner where the wall boards ran widest. She crouched and drew steady, tongue just out, face frowning the way craftsmen frown. 3 stick figures under a round sun, one tall, one small, one in between with a black scribble of coat around the shoulders. Below it she printed with all the letters she owned. "Mama." The room didn't move. Even the wire outside seemed to wait its turn. Josie did not talk. She tied off the stitch, blue thread neat as a scar that tells the truth about a knife, but does not brag on it. She held Daisy out, not to give, not to take, but to offer the thing back better than it came. Sadie reached. The doll fit her small arm where it had always belonged. She tucked Daisy in, looked at Josie, then at the drawing, then back again, as if checking that pictures and people might agree for once. Luke made a sound in his chest that was not speech. He stepped away from the jam and found the kettle, busying his hands with a job that didn't need doing. The ring flashed and went dark as he set cups down he didn't remember picking up. On the wall the word held its ground, not a question. A placing of stones where a house might be set later. The fire dropped a notch, settling to the kind of heat you can stand near all day. Josie laid the remainder of the blue ribbon back in the tin and closed the lid with her fingertip. She did not look at Ruth Ann's picture. She didn't have to. Some kindness is done with your head bowed. Outside, the wind changed key. The telegraph wire gave a low, steady note that put its back to the room and leaned in, a hymn with no words to get wrong. Inside, the new blue stitch on Daisy's shoulder caught the light and kept it. A small seam that said without saying, "This will hold." The word on the wall held M-A-M-A, and the room made a place for it, the way a pasture makes room for one more post, if you said it true. The stove ran even. Snow brushed the north face without malice. The wire outside kept a low hum, not talking so much as waiting its turn. Josie gathered what small tools of her life she owned and set them square, needles rolled, thread wound, a telegraph jotter no bigger than her hand, with a pencil stub tucked in the spine. She meant to write down miles and dates the way a body marks the days in a hard winter, just to know they'd been survived. When she slid the book onto the table, a folded sheet slipped from its cover and showed an edge of official words. Luke was setting cups, not looking to read any woman's business. The sheet drifted to the floor and he caught it, a reflex a man has around things that might burn or blow. His eyes hit the first line because eyes will do that before manners can stop them. Abdominal. Injury. Childbearing, unlikely. He closed his hand soft as if paper could bruise, and put the sheet back in the book without turning another inch of it. He didn't apologize. He didn't have to. He set the jotter where her hand could find it, then stood with his knuckles on the table as if bracing for a team to start pulling. "Takes a grit to carry a wound inside," he said. She looked up, found no pity there, only the kind of respect men keep for horses that won't quit and for women who put their back into days that don't promise much. She breathed once and let the guard down that much. "I carry it, not alone," she said. Luke's gaze flicked to the black duster across her shoulders, to Sadie, to the blue stitch now holding Daisy at the seam. He nodded once, an inventory of what holds, and took his hands off the table. "It was a depot hospital," Josie said, voice low, matter-of-fact as a ledger. "Boxcars for walls, tarpaulin roof. We boiled the same kettle till the handle loosened. Shell came short, took boards and shrapnel, and a man I was stitching took a piece out of me for even trade." She touched her ribs like counting rails. "Surgeon said I'd live. He was right. He said other things." She let that sit. "Since then, when fever climbs or a child shakes, I tap." She set 2 fingers on the table and made a small Morse lullaby out of knuckle and wood. Soft, steady. Die. Die. No, da. Da. Not a word, exactly, just a pattern a body can lean on when language goes thin. The sound threaded into the stove's breath, into the room's habit of quiet, into the line outside, until it all felt like one animal sleeping. Sadie turned toward the tapping as if a name had been spoken. Her shoulders let go the inch they owed. She lifted her small hand and, after a moment, measuring courage, laid it beside Josie's and matched the beat. Late by a hair at first, then right on it. 2 sets of knuckles saying the same small thing. Luke did not move, but his silver ring began to tick the table rail. Unwilled, in time. Men who shoe horses can keep time without knowing they know it. The ring kept the backbeat a bar or two and then went still, as if embarrassed to be caught in music. "You wired?" he asked, a half smile that didn't get as far as the mouth. "Operator on the rail?" "Part-time," she said. "Enough to copy when the man at Dry Creek takes sick. Enough to spell. Enough to hear a line talk when nobody else is listening." Outside, the wind drew a longer bow across the wire, and the room felt the note down low in the joints. The shell bell at the door answered with 3 soft clinks, not by will but by happenstance and truth, and Sadie's eyes went to it quick, recognition first, understanding later. 3, Josie said, still tapping. "That's a piece of a song I used to use in the cars. When a man is more pain than person, words don't stick. Beat does Sadie's fingers kept the time even. When Josie let her own rest, the child's mouth shaped nothing, but her breathing learned the rhythm and settled to it. Daisy sat between them, blue thread winking when the fire breathed. Luke cleared his throat and missed his cue to speak, then found a safer sentence. "We'll need another stick for the north wall come sundown," he said, as if to warn the weather of their intentions. Josie nodded. She slid the letter back under the cover of the jotter, not to hide it, only to put it where it belonged, in the book where signals are kept and sent. She drew a small cross of pencil on the page for the day, a mark no bigger than a seed. The tapping came back to her fingers before she knew it. Die, die, da, die. Luke's ring answered one soft tick, not quite on purpose. Outside, the wire took what they gave it and held the tone, a quiet partner. Inside, the three of them sat with their hands on the same table, and in the space between breaths and beats a kind of agreement got made that didn't need anyone to sign it. Toward noon, the wind shifted a point. The stove sighed. The house felt set. Somewhere in the back of Luke's mind, a map unfolded, and on it a reach of low country called South Draw lay quiet as a coiled rope. He didn't know yet why the name had come up, only that the wire always had its reasons when it chose a note and held it. Toward noon, the wind swung another point and laid a knife edge on the yard. The wire outside took a higher note, thin as a skein pulled tight. Luke listened with his head tipped a fraction, like a man measuring a horse's breath. "Talbot's place," he said, not saying why. "We'll go while the drift holds its temper." Mrs. Talbot lived out past the siding in a lean plank cabin that had once kept company with a wayside relay. The telegraph spur still ran behind her fence, a tired run of poles with glass hats cocked at angles where storms had lectured them. A wood board of Morse hung by her door, letters burned in with a stove poker, quick and sure, as if whoever made it had known the code by touch. A jar of broken porcelain insulators sat on the sill, white heads and blue shards, catching what winter light there was. She answered to their knock with the door already in her hand, as if she'd been watching weather approach and decided not to be surprised by people. She was narrow and straight, a widow built out of string and stubborn, one good eye clear, the other filmed to milk. She looked at Luke first, at the black duster on Josie's shoulders next, then down to Sadie, who held Daisy tight enough to tell the story. "Mrs. Talbot," Luke said. "Hardin," she answered, and let the name sit where it fell. To Josie, "You copy." She jerked her chin at the Morse board on the wall. "Some," Josie said. "Then you can hear a thing the rest miss. Come in out of that." The cabin smelled of iron and lye and dry beans, thinking about softening. On a small table lay a station log, leather tired at the hinge, pages foxing at the edges. A pencil lay crosswise like a man asleep on a bench. "Was my husband's," Mrs. Talbot said. "Then mine, when his breath ran short. I kept it after the rail moved the key on into Dry Creek. A body doesn't throw away a book that remembers." Luke set his hat down and stood aside. Josie rested a hand on Sadie's crown, a touch that said, "We leave when I lift, not before." The wire out back gave a small shiver and then held. Mrs. Talbot paged without hurry. Her finger found December, then the 17th. Then a night written in a smaller hand, like the writer had tried not to wake the page. She showed them the line. 12:17 a.m. Wire down at South Draw. Bell rang 3. The words sat plain. No flourishes. Facts wear boots. 3, Josie said. Love this tale? Hit like, share, and subscribe to keep the West wild. Mrs. Talbot nodded. I hung a spent shell on the threshold so I could hear what the wire was saying when I had to be in the kitchen. Line'll pluck a door just enough to tell you your name if you listen daily. That night it rang 3, not wind clatter, clean, even. She looked at Sadie now, not unkind. Somebody had been singing a 3-beat lullaby along that wire for a while before. Then it quit, then the down. Sadie's fingers closed around Daisy's blue-stitched shoulder. Her chest worked quick once, then settled when Josie's hand found her hair again. Josie could feel the child's scalp under those thin strands and the way a memory runs its thumb along a scar to see if it's healed yet. "You're saying the wire remembers," Josie said. "I'm saying Snow forgets," Mrs. Talbot answered, voice gone low and flat. "And wire remembers in sound. Tracks blow, ears keep." Luke took the log and held it like it might snap if handled wrong. The silver ring on his finger marked the margin with a small circle of heat where the stove light touched it. His eyes did not leave the 1217. You could see a man adding it to a private column that already had too many entries and not enough answers. Mrs. Talbot limped to a nail and took down a hand-drawn map, section lines and creek bends and fence cuts, marked in the practiced hand of somebody who had gone to all the places, and measured with her boots. A red grease pencil ringed South Draw like a noose. "Line sags there," she said. "Wind stacks in it like grain. When something breaks, it's at the low in a song. You learn that, you know where to listen." Josie stepped closer. The map smelled of smoke and bacon and old paper. South Draw lay like a hollow where troubles nest. She could see the road in her head, the way a wagon would choose it because the grade looked kind, and the way the weather would choose it because the world made a funnel there. "You're Ruth Ann," Mrs. Talbot said, the name coming out careful. "Went light over this threshold some nights. I heard her hum back to that line when the child was fussy. 3 beats, then 1 long, kept time fine." She tipped her chin at Sadie, whose face was set, listening with all of herself. "When a song leaves a house, the wire knows it." Luke's jaw hardened a notch and then eased. He did not ask questions that make more winter in a room. "You kept all the logs." "All I had left," Mrs. Talbot said. She closed the book, laid her palm on it, as if finishing a prayer. Behind the cabin, the telegraph wire took the wind and plucked higher. A bright string pulled too tight. The jar of insulator shards on the sill rang the faintest china note. 1, 2, 3, pure by accident or not by accident at all. Sadie's head came up like a deer that's heard the creek move. Mrs. Talbot's good eye softened. "Hear that, chick? That's a line telling truth nobody can blow away." Josie looked from the jar to the board to the map and felt the room shift a degree toward understanding. Pieces quit being pieces for a breath and wanted to make a thing. She put 2 fingers on the table and made the Morse lullaby, light, so as not to shame the wire at its own trade. Die, die, da, die. Sadie's hand found the rhythm without looking. The cabin breathed once, full and even. Luke rolled the map and tied it with a string. He didn't ask to take the log. Some books stay where they were written. He looked at Mrs. Talbot with a kind of thanks a man doesn't say out loud, because debt grows when you name it. "Mind the draw," she told him. "Windpile's stories there till they go mean." They stepped back into the day. A high note rode the line toward the ranch, as if it meant to show them the way. Snow sifted from the eaves like a man rubbing sleep from his eyes. Luke set his hat and took the map as if it were a tool he'd had all along. Josie tightened the black duster at the throat. Sadie tucked Daisy under her arm, thumb finding the blue stitch and resting there. The wind met them honest and cold. The wire above them sang, not loud but sure, and the land ahead wrote South Draw in a hand even a stranger could read. They came back with the day sliding off its edge. Snow had quit trying to prove anything and lay level to the fences. The wire ran a steady hum between poles, no higher than the sound a man makes when he's thinking with his teeth together. Luke stepped up first, and the porch told him what he needed. The stoop board wore a fresh gouge, round at the bite and flared. A 7-petal rosette pressed in hard by a heel that didn't belong to him. He crouched. The print held a dusting of ice crystals, new as a calf on the ground. He set 2 fingers in the cut and lifted them without touching anything, measuring the depth with his eyes. He set a rosette here, he said. Knows this place. The barbed wire along the lot line twanged once in a crosswind, not loose, not tight, just telling on whoever had tongued it. Luke's face didn't change much, but something old in it woke up. He left his hat on and walked the eave, boot edges on boards, light as a hand. Josie and Sadie followed with the kind of quiet you keep for barns at night and rooms where the sick sleep. The storehouse latch had been pried, not smashed, not fooled with by a boy. Whoever did it knew pine and iron and how much you could ask of each. Splinters lay like straw. Josie set Daisy into Sadie's arms and slid her own hand across the scar. Something caught under her nail, a coarse brown thread, greasy with the faint lanolin smell wool keeps even after rain. She rolled it between finger and thumb. It wasn't from the blanket in their room, and it wasn't from Luke's coat. It had the feel of a poncho weave, open and tough, the kind trail hands favor when weather makes up its mind to take a man apart. Luke's eyes went to the thread, then to Josie's face. You know it? I've mended worse, she said. This is the cheap stuff they sell out of wagons when the real syrup is dear. Rust brown, sheds sleet, drinks smoke, smells like sheep even when you wish it didn't. He nodded once. A name did a slow circuit behind his eyes and didn't come out. Names are a kind of weather. You don't call a storm into the yard unless you mean to rope it. He unbelted his sidearm, snapped the cylinder, and dusted it with stove ash. Old trick to pull damp from places oil can't see. He wiped with a rag that had been a shirt once and set the gun back into leather like a thing he'd promised to keep honest. Then he took a length of barbed wire, fresh off the coil, and laid it across the window ledge inside the storehouse, where a man's hand might reach without thinking. He didn't look at Josie while he did it, but he slowed enough that she could see the lesson as much as the act. North Post sagged, he said. I'll string another strand. Won't stop a man who's decided to be stupid, but it'll sing when he tries. The ring on his left hand flashed dull as a pewter moon when he pulled the wire snug. Every staple took 2 hits, true and measured. The wire answered each with a grade school note, a harp string taught by weather. Sadie stood with Daisy clutched against her, eyes fixed on the rosette scar at the stoop, the way a fawn fixes on a coyote's track and learns something it would rather not know. Josie eased down into a squat where the print showed best and tapped a quiet pattern on the threshold with 2 knuckles. Da. Not to call anything, just to remind small hearts that beats belong to them, not to fear. Sadie's shoulders unhitched a notch. The child didn't speak, but her breathing learned the count. Latch wasn't loud, Josie said, rising. He knew how to lean and listen, took what he wanted and left quick. What he wanted was doors, Luke said, coming back from the corner with a coil under his arm, and to see who was here to set 'em. He glanced once at the black duster on Josie's shoulders, at the blue stitch on the doll. Maybe to see who wasn't? They put the storehouse to rights. Not perfect, just honest. Luke set a nail where the pry had gone and backed it with an iron strap he'd saved from a broken bit. Josie swept the splinters into her hand so the wind couldn't make a map of the place to read later. She wrapped the brown thread in a twist of paper and slid it into her jotter beside the letter and the Morse she kept for herself. When the chores took them out to the lot, Luke walked the barb line slow, palming each staple like a rosary, feeling what held and what would lie about it. At the corner post he found another tell, a scuff with sand in it, not from their yard, the kind a man brings home in the hem of his cloak, from country that likes to blow red when it gets mad. He kicked it level and said, nothing more. By the time they circled back, the light was down to pewter. and the stove's glow showed through the kitchen window like a lantern you leave on a fence to tell a rider he's found the right gate. Luke took one last look at the rosette on the stoop, then at the horizon where South Draw lay in the mind, if not the eye. He set his boot directly over the mark, not to hide it, but to own it. Inside he hung his hat, then the hammer on its peg. He poured water into a pan and set it to warm, the way men do when they've decided the night will be met on their feet. Josie stood at the table, the thread safe in her book, the duster across her shoulders, her 2 fingers resting on the wood where beats feel truest. Sadie leaned against her hip and watched the door. The wire outside gave a low, sure note and held it, not alarm, not comfort, just truth. "Whoever he is," Luke said at last, voice even, "he knows how to stand where the wind won't tell on him, but he left sign enough." He set a hand on the duster's collar, not taking, just counting stitches with his thumb. "We'll let the lines sing for us when he comes again." The shell bell at the door clicked once like a man clearing his throat. Then the house settled. Snow went on pretending to be peace. And somewhere out toward the draw, a rider, or a notion of one, lifted his head to the wind and listened back. Toward evening, the sky laid a yellow shawl over the breaks. Cloud went gold at the edges. A painter's last stroke left wet. The yard had the held breath feel of cattle before thunder. The wire took a new pitch, higher, strained, then dropped to a hum that put grit on a man's teeth. A rider sifted out of that light, small at first and then enough to count, bay horse, square-shouldered, a breast strap hung with a spent shell bell that answered the trot. Not the house bell's steady 3. This was 3 and a hitch. Hurried, crooked, the wrong lullaby. Sadie froze where she stood. Her hands crushed Daisy to her ribs, thumb on the blue stitch like a prayer bead. Breath went shallow. The wrong rhythm had lived in her bones since a night no one could name right. Luke stepped to the porch, neither hiding nor welcoming. The set of a man who had decided already what he would do if a thing turned bad. The silver ring on his left hand took a lick of sun and let it go. Josie slid up beside Sadie, 2 knuckles finding the table rail, giving a soft tap to set the house's heartbeat back where it belonged. Die. The child didn't move, but the tight in her shoulders unbraided one twist. The rider lifted a hand to show nothing in it. Hat brim tipped. Close in, the face came clear. F. Moran, the ex-deputy, older by a straggle of winters and a scar that hadn't asked permission. Leather wore the shape of a man who sat straight, because that's how you survive long. "Hardin," he said, voice like gravel in a coffee can. His horse stood patient, steam, thin off the cap of its nose. Luke didn't give him the door. "Evenin', F." F's eyes tracked once over the stoop, found the rosette gouge and gave it the weight due. He let the reins fall and stepped down slow, the shell bell on the strap clinking that off pattern 3 as if the past had a metronome of its own. Sadie's knuckles went white again. Josie's tap came back, quiet and sure, and the girl's breath answered it measure for measure. "Figured you'd want to see," F said. He swung a saddlebag off the bay, set it on the porch rail, and thumbed the buckle. Out came a broken rosette spur. One pedal snapped clean, the rest sharp as a yucca. He laid it on the rail where the sun could tell its truth. "Pulled this at the edge of South Draw," he said, "right where an insulator busted and left porcelain in the grass. Your line's been talking about it all day." He brought up a blue-white shard, smooth on one side, scored on the other where iron and storm had worked it. Luke took the rosette without making a face to hang on it. The ring chimed the iron one time. He turned the spur in his hand, weighing the man who wore it more than the gear. His eyes went to the rosette print still faint in the stoopboard. The break and the bite matched like kin. "Not Deke," Josie said, not asking, only drawing breath like a person who's heard enough to put a name to fear and chooses to put it away neat. F shook his head. "Not now, but he's the sort won't leave a sign he can help. Deke swaps horses, keeps his spurs. Man's been in hock to the wind a long while." He set the shard beside the spur so they could keep each other company. "He's been near your line, maybe under it." The wire above them sang high again, a thin knife-edged note that made the porchboard sympathize. Out past the ridge, a gold cloud rode the land like a slow train, and behind it, the first dark of a weather change showed its teeth. Luke's face held steady. "You follow him." "Far as a man can follow sign, the wind keeps erasing." F looked at Sadie then, not hard, just honest. His eyes flicked to the shell bell on his tack. He touched it with one finger, silenced it. "Didn't mean to bring that song," he said, almost to himself. Sadie didn't answer. She hadn't learned strangers enough to spend words on them, but her shoulders dropped a notch when the clatter quit. Josie's hand stayed near, fingers ready to tap if the world got jumpy. F drew a breath like a man who'd come to the door to make a report, not to sit a spell. South draws low. Something broke there the night 1217 got written in Talbot's book. Might be a habit with him. Might be a place he comes back to think he's alone. Luke set the rosette down on the rail, palm flat, a moment over the iron as if a map might print itself through skin. "We'll mind the draw," he said. F tipped his hat by a finger. "I'll ride the far side and—" "Listen. Wire'll talk if you ask proper and don't crowd it." He swung up on the bay, took the reins without hurry. The shell bell stayed quiet under his hand. He turned the horse toward the low place where the land funneled wind and men into the same choices. The sun pulled the last of its gold from the cloud and left the edges tin cold. When F's back was a shape against the ridge, the wire let go a long, thin cry, like a bow drawn past comfort. In the yard, the barbed fence answered with a faint harp note. Josie felt Sadie lean into her hip, the kind of lean that says a body's tired of holding itself up alone. She set her 2 fingers to the rail and gave the beat that had saved more than one soul when talk was no use. Luke gathered the spur and the shard, carried them inside without ceremony, and set them where the day's work sat, on a table used to tools, not trophies. He looked once at the black duster on Josie's shoulders, at the silver ring that still knew how to refuse the light, and at the door that would be asked for an answer before long. Cloud rode the ridge. The house took one long breath. The night coming had purpose in it. The line outside made ready to speak. Love this tale? Hit like, share, and subscribe to keep the West wild. Night moved in on felt feet. The stove held its glow. The wire outside drew a thin high note and kept it, the kind men hear in their jawbone. Snow ticked the north face, patient as a clerk. Luke checked the latch once, then twice, and set the hammer where a hand could find it without looking. He said nothing more. It broke fast. A hinge sighed wrung out by the storehouse, then a board cracked where pry met soft grain. The shell bell on the door gave one surprised click and went still. Cold came in a sheet. A knife showed itself in the dark the way a cat's eye shows, just enough to be believed. A shape slid through the doorframe and didn't make the mistakes amateurs make. Josie didn't waste time naming him. She smelled poncho wool, lanolin, and smoke, and saw the heel flash once. A rosette spur with one petal snapped. The same bite had signed their stoop. "Sadie," she said, but only with her hand. She drew the child behind her, and in the same breath wrapped the black duster around them both, yanking the hem high across her ribs. Earlier, while the kettle talked, she'd slipped a slice of tobacco tin into that hem. a field car trick from bad nights when wood and wool needed a bone. The man came low and sure, knife canting to slide under clothing. Josie drove into it, not away, turning her side so the blade met the stiffened edge. Steel glanced, then bit through cloth and tin and caught meat anyway, a hot rake along the ribs. Breath left her in a sound she didn't owe anybody. The duster held enough to change what the blade had planned. Luke's gun spoke from the doorway, a flat, hard crack that made the room remember. The man staggered, shoulder hit by the slug, knife clattering, hand searching for air that wasn't there. He wheeled, saw the door, then measured distance and decided he didn't own it. Josie had no air to spend on screaming. She set 2 knuckles to the window frame and tapped the only language that had ever come when she called. Da. Distress, plain and old as iron. She kept the beat even while the cut burned and the world narrowed to one chair, one edge of table, one child's breath warm on her wrist. The wire outside shrieked on a gust and then carried the rattle of her tapping into its own bones. Out by the fence line a horse shifted, and a man with his palm to the post heard something that wasn't wind. F. Moran lifted his head. He set the side of his cup to the brace and took the code along his teeth. He swung into the saddle without saying what he'd heard and ran the bay at the yard. Inside, the man tried to make a second choice. He didn't get it. Luke closed the distance in 3 long steps. The silver ring on his left hand caught the light as he struck the knife away, then drove the man back across the table. A chair went over. A pan skidded and rang like struck bell metal. Sadie didn't cry. She held Daisy to her stomach and stared at the knife the way small deer stare at brush before it becomes coyote. The door blew wide and let in boots and iron. F came first. 2 neighbors hard on his shoulder, men who answer when a line says, "Come." Deke Hollis, no more shadow now, tried to run his mouth and found that the world wasn't taking his orders tonight. Ef turned him and snapped irons on his wrists, clean and quick. Nobody said sheriff. Nights have ways of handling their own until morning. Josie's knees found the floor because floors are honest about what holds. She put her palm flat under the cut and pressed. Warmth ran between fingers anyway. Luke was there on his knees, hand over hers, weight right, pressure steady, the way a man holds a wound shut on himself in a branding pen when there's still work to do. Stay, he told the blood or the woman or the night, it wasn't clear which. His ring knocked her brow as he leaned close to see where the edge had tracked. She tasted iron and stove smoke and the sour of old fear leaving a room. Josie spoke into the wool, quiet and flint-hard. "No one takes my child out of these hands." F hauled Deke upright. The man swayed, poncho hanging heavy, one rosette spur biting his boot heel, the other broken pedal riding Luke's table like a confession. Outside, the barbed fence gave a harp note in the wind and then stilled, listening to what men decided. "Bring me that kettle," Josie said, voice steadying as it crossed the boards, "and tear a sheet, top drawer." She had not been asked for orders in a while. Bodies tend to remember who they were when blood is in the room. Luke didn't argue. He moved as told, brought heat, cloth, a handful of salt. He tore a strip with the sure hands of a man who's mended harness in sleet. Josie packed what needed packing, bound what needed binding. The cut ran angry and long, but not forever deep. Tin in the hem had cheated the bone of its bite. F looked once from the irons to the woman on the floor, and then past both to the wire, which had gone back to its low, even hum, now that it had done what it came for. "We heard you," he said, not to brag, not to soothe, just to say, "True." The night breathed again. Snow shouldered the door and then backed off. Luke set his palm to Josie's cheek and found heat where there should have been more winter. He kept pressure and counted under his breath, not numbers, but beats. The old de coming back to him without permission. Across the room, Sadie slid forward on her knees, laid Daisy careful by Josie's hip, and put her small hand on Josie's wrist, where the pulse lived. She didn't speak. She didn't have to. The room knew what she meant. F shoved Deke through the door into the useful cold. Irons clapped once more. The wire outside took the weather's hand and hummed low like a hymn without words. Inside a man's ring, a woman's hands, a black duster stained dark, and a child's touch held the room together until speech decided to come back. Night settled like a quilt someone had mended in the dark. Stitches long, stitches short, but warm where it needed to be. The stove threw a red hush into the room, steady as a heartbeat you could see. Steam rose off a damp cloth and went to nothing. The cut along Josie's ribs had quit arguing out loud, but it still talked under her palm in a language of heat. F and the neighbors hauled Deke to the cold, where iron does its thinking. Their boot scrape faded, the wire outside let go the high keen and fell to a low cradle hum, the sound a mother makes when she's out of words and down to bone. Luke washed his hands slow, old blood brown in the pan like a small storm dying. He wrung the cloth, laid it fresh along the bandage, then set a second under Josie's neck to rob the fever of its climb. He did not hurry the work. His silver ring knocked the rim of the basin once, a hollow note that would have carried clear down the hall in a quieter house. Sadie sat up on her knees beside the pallet, a daisy tucked under one arm, watching with the long stare of a child who has seen too much and decided to keep her eyes open anyway. When Luke stepped back to tend the fire, she put her 2 fingers to the bed rail and began a small tapping, hesitant, then sure, the same Morse lullaby she'd learned off Josie's knuckles. Die, 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 die. The bed took the beat into its slats. The stove took it into its iron. The house took it into the spaces where men keep quiet. Keep time, little one, Luke said, setting a split to glow, raking the coals so they didn't smother each other. His voice had dropped the iron out of it. It traveled soft and came back whole. Josie drifted on that beat. Fever tried twice to climb the hill and got sent back by cloth and patience. Every time it rose, Sadie's fingers answered it with even taps, and Luke's hand came to rest on the blanket near her shoulder, not touching the wound, just standing guard the way a man stands a gate at lambing. The black duster hung over a chair by the stove. Dark stain dried at the hem where tin had put a backbone to wool. Heat drew a shine off the thread, where she'd mended the collar hours and a winter ago. On the table, the tin tobacco box sat shut with its blue ribbon folded square inside. Beside it, Josie's jotter lay where she'd put it, pencil asleep in the crease. Luke's glance touched both things and moved on, as if eyes could make promises the mouth wasn't ready to break or keep. The room said little. The line outside said less. Once a plank settled and the shell bell by the door gave a breath of sound. One shy click that didn't amount to a word. Wind shouldered the wall, thought better, and slid down the siding like a man choosing not to start a fight at closing time. "Water," Josie said, not much more than breath. Luke had it waiting, hand under cup, to lend his heat to the stovepipes. She swallowed, closed her eyes, and listened. For a thing she thought she'd put behind her for good. The sound of other hands minding the long part of the night. The tap on the rail went on. Die, 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 die. It filled the room but didn't crowd it. It filled the spaces fever leaves when it turns to go. And it filled the break in Sadie where words had once lived and then moved out without a forwarding. She leaned closer, cheek to the quilt, and let the beat walk down her breathing until they matched. Her mouth found a shape and let it go small as a thread. We waited. Luke did not look away from the fire. He did not need to. Now we stay, he said, to the stove, to the girl, to the woman who had lain down between knife and child and made the world pick a side. The wire outside kept on with its low old hymn. The stove lowered a shade. The duster warmed where it hung, picking up the day's story and keeping it close till morning. Luke set his chair where he could see both the door and the bed without making theater of it. He rested his forearms on his knees and let the tired run out of him on its own feet. Time passed the way time does when work is honest and waiting is the work. He changed the cloth when it asked. He banked the fire to keep the red without the roar. Sadie's tapping thinned, then slowed, then stilled, her hand going to sleep under its own small duty. When her fingers fell away at last, Luke covered them with his palm and finished the pattern quiet as a prayer. Die. Josie breathed deeper. Fever slipped a rung. Somewhere in the rafters a dowel creaked and then forgot itself. The ring on Luke's hand cooled. The skin beneath it remembered a warmth that hadn't visited in a long season. He let his head tip back against the post and watched night do what it came to do. Heal where it could, hold where it must. Dawn would thin its way in soon enough, with its small arithmetic of chores and choices. For now the room kept 2-3 truths: a child's beat, a woman's breath, and the wire's lullaby, drawing a long line through the dark and tying the ends together so the house would not come apart. Dawn thinned the dark by degrees, careful as a man shaving with cold water. The stove kept its red hush. Josie woke to a room that had held through the night. Sadie curled small with Daisy tucked in. Luke asleep in the chair, the way men sleep when they won't let go of the door with their eyes. Fever had come down. The cut spoke less. The house had that after-battle quiet where work returns and talk knows better. She eased herself up on an elbow. The tin tobacco box sat where it always sat, and beside it lay her telegraph jotter. There are some things a woman says out loud and some she writes, so the world won't have to help carry them. She pulled a sheet, set it square, and wrote plain, "Luke, you've given me warmth I didn't expect to see again. I can't give you a child. You and the girl need more than a woman with a mended coat and a field scar." She stopped there. More words would only knock the same nail. She folded the letter once, laid it beside the tin, and set her palm flat to breathe through the ache. Sleep found her before she meant it to. Houses will do that. Take a burden off your hands a minute and set it on a shelf. The wire outside changed key. A draft woke the shell bell, and it gave a faint throat clear. Sadie stirred. She slid from the quilt without a sound and padded to the table. She could not read like a clerk, but she knew her own name where ink made it, and she knew child when letters stood in that shape. She read what she could and supplied the rest with fear. Her eyes went to the tin. Small fingers worried the lid. It gave. Inside lay the daguerreotype and the blue ribbon folded to a square. Sadie lifted the ribbon as if it were a thing that could bite. She wrapped it once round her wrist and tied a knot a girl could break if she had to. Outside, the wire drew a louder hum, the kind that lives in the ribs. South and east, the draw held wind the way a bowl holds water. Sadie's head tilted. The sound was the wrong lullaby and the right landmark. She set Daisy under her arm, leaned the letter back against the tin as if that might keep it from doing harm, and slipped the latch. Cold slid in around her like a choice. She stepped out into it and closed the door gentle so it would not wake stay out of anyone's mouth. Josie woke to the absence before she knew its name. The room had changed weight. She saw the letter propped where it shouldn't be and felt the floor tilt. The tin lay open like a book. The blue ribbon was gone. "Luke," she said, already halfway to the door. He was up in the same motion, hand on her elbow, and then away when he saw she could stand. The latch was ajar, snow feathered in the crack like breath. "She read it," Josie said. "The words cost more than the night. She thinks I'm leaving because of her." She stood very still and listened with all the places a woman keeps for trouble. She'll go to sound, to where it's loudest, ride to the loud wind. Luke didn't waste a second on should-haves. "Saddle," he said, and the chair scraped once and was empty. He was a rope coil and 2 strides to the lean-to. Tack fell into his hands like it had been waiting there to be forgiven. The mare, deep-chested winter, thick, blew steam and took the bit without argument. Luke swung the black duster over Josie's shoulders and pulled it close at the throat, leaving the tin-stiff hem free. He took up his hat, then stopped long enough to lay his palm flat on the letter, as if to tell it would have to wait its turn. Out in the yard, the wire sang big, a long-drawn note that made the teeth ache. Snow had set hard, a crust that would hold a child's weight. The barb line gave a thin harp string as they passed. Somewhere a hinge protested and learned better manners. Luke put Josie up behind the saddle and swung in ahead. His silver ring flashed dull as pewter when he gathered leather. "Wind took her once," he said, not loud, not to argue with anything. Let wind pay back now. They took the poles like a trail. Men lay roads where land says yes. Wind lays lines where stories not. South draw pulled the sound like a magnet. The mare felt the urgency through rein and seat and went to a ground-eating trot that would not throw Josie out of herself. Air cut their lungs clean. The world went to white and wire and the sound that rides both. Half a mile down, a brightness snagged in a young pine caught Luke's eye. He hauled the mare to a slant and reached. The blue ribbon hung there, torn where a small wrist had worried it in the cold. It swung once in the wind, doing its best imitation of a flag that had something to say and no letters to say it with. "Good girl," Josie whispered to the day or the child or the luck that had not yet run out. She took the ribbon and tied it to the duster's cuff, where she could see it move with their going. The mare blew steam like a train making up its mind. Snow-muffled hoof sound to a thud you felt more than heard. The wire above them carried the hum forward into the hollow, showing them the way a lantern shows a gate, not the whole road. They dropped into the first low of the draw. Wind stacked there like grain, moving without leaving, voice big as a church organ. Luke leaned the mare into it and let her choose the firmest ground. He knew better than to argue with a horse that had read this country longer than he had. Josie set her palm against his spine to steady a world that meant to shrug them off. The ribbon ticked her wrist. The ring knocked the rein when Luke shifted his grip. "Sadie," he called once, not to waste the name but to stake a claim in the air. The wind took it, softened it, sent it on. The draw turned and opened its throat to them. Somewhere ahead there would be a curl of blue again where a girl's hand had fumbled, and then the dark under a pine, and then, if the wire and the luck held, the small shape of a child with a doll tucked in, and the past howling over her head. The mare steamed. The snow took their noise and put it away, and the wire sang on, sure as a teacher, counting time for slow learners. They rode into that sound. The land gathered itself for an answer. They found the next sign where the draw bent and let a stand of pine break the wind. The blue ribbon showed again, this time snagged low, a worried knot half come, a girl's work undone by cold. Luke eased the mare down a drifted bank where the split rock creek ran under a skin of glass, black water sliding slow beneath. Wind boomed in the hollow like an organ trying its lowest pipe. "Easy," he told the mare, and she widened her stance and listened to her feet. Under the first pine on the lee side lay a small bundle the color of snow that has learned dirt. Sadie folded around Daisy, cheek gray-white, lashes stuck with frost. She tucked herself where a child thinks wind can't find the last of you. It finds everything, but not as fast as love with a horse and a line to follow. Josie slid off before the mare stopped moving and went to her knees in the drift. "Hey now," she said, voice quiet as a stove door, hands already working, the old fieldcraft waking in the fingers. She set her palm to the child's neck, where pulse lives shallow. It answered, thin but present. Josie tapped once on Sadie's sleeve with two knuckles. "Die, die, die, die." A beat the body knows even asleep in cold. Eyelids shivered, breath hitched. Not words yet, not needed. Luke stripped the black duster and wrapped it over both of them, child first, then woman. His own shirt sleeves meeting weather bare. The wool made a tent for heat to be born in. He lifted them together the way a man lifts a half-broke colt that's learned the ground too well. "I've got you," he said to the air, to the creek, to whatever listens when a man stakes his whole self. The wire above the draw sang on, but softer here, distance doing the kind part of its job. The mare turned for home without being told, choosing the firm line, ears pricked to hear the boards of their own barn calling out across the white. They rode back in a quiet that wasn't fear anymore. Snow hissed under iron. The ribbon on Josie's cuff knocked light against her wrist, counting a life one small tap at a time. Sadie's hands found their way under the duster, little fingers tucking into the wool's seam. Blue stitch against palm, Daisy caged safe in the crook of her elbow. At the house, Luke shouldered the door, and the warm red hush met them. He laid them near the stove, set kettles crowding the potbelly so water would choose steam fast, rubbed life back into hands, into feet, the way a man rubs a foal awake with burlap. He said no prayers out loud. He worked one with his palms. Josie kept the beat on the quilt, where Sadie's ear could feel it more than hear it. Dee, dee, da, dee. The child's breath caught up by half inches until it matched. By and by the room came back to itself. The shell bell at the door gave a single shy click as boards expanded. The wire tried a note and found it didn't need to speak much where a stove could. They slept then, all three, in the ways they each could afford. Sadie under the duster like a seed under loam. Josie with her palm on the child's shoulder and her own bandage holding by will and cloth. Luke in the chair with his head tipped back and one hand on the floor like he could keep the house from drifting if it came to that. Morning skated in over the creek and set a thin shine along the rafters. The world smelled of coffee and wet wool and a day that meant to be forgiven. Luke stood at the stove a long minute with his left hand held to the heat, as if teaching a ring what warmth was for. Then he pulled a rawhide thong from a nail, worked the silver free of his finger, and slipped it onto the leather. He hung it from the stove hook, where iron and light could read it both. He turned to Josie and didn't reach because some words don't want a hand on them. "Families where we choose to stay," he said, the sentence cut down to the bone. "Stay with me." Sadie woke enough to understand the shape of the room. She lifted her small hand, found Josie's wrist, and gave two soft beats, not code so much as consent. Josie's mouth eased into a line that had learned 100 hard days and now picked a different one. "Stay," she said. No preacher walked in to make more of it. No bell rang but the kettle lid rattling once and thinking better. Luke put another split on. The stove took it like a promise. He gathered the duster, folded it clean, and set it on the chair's back, dark wool catching a thread of sun. Daisy slept on her side, the blue stitch bright as a vein in good stone. By the door stood 3 pairs of boots. Man large, woman worn, child small, thaw dark around the ankles, set heel to heel like folks who remembered to turn together. On the hook by the stove, the ring hung quiet on raw hide. Not thrown away, not forgotten. Set aside the way a man sets down a tool when its work is done and something better is ready to begin. Outside, the telegraph wire went on with its old song, wind plucking what notes it could claim. Inside it was still. The house breathed even. The beat on the table had gone to rest, but anybody who had ever learned it could find it again in the floor, in the chair, in the way 3 lives kept time without talking. They ate when the coffee said to. They spoke when the day required it. The rest they left to the stove, the boots, the folded coat, the doll with the blue seam, all of it saying the same thing in a dozen true ways. This will hold. When the stove goes to a red hush and the wire sings low in the rafters, that's when a house remembers it's a home. A silver ring resting on raw hide, a black duster folded clean, Daisy asleep by the hearth. Small things, but they hold. Out here, family isn't found so much as chosen, slow as thaw, sure as morning. If this story set a little warmth in your coat, leave a note below. Tell us the sound that once told you to stay. If you want more trails like this, quiet, dust true, and healing, click like so the track doesn't blow over, and subscribe to ride along for the next Old West tale. Tap the bell. 2 soft beats, and you'll hear us when the wire hums again. Until then, keep your fire banked and your heart open. This will hold.